Oh, well, hello there. Welcome back to Cultural Anthropology. Today we're going to jump into culture, and we're going to talk about what creates culture, what changes culture, what is sort of the major pieces of culture, how we describe it, how we understand it. But first, before we get started, I wanted to talk briefly about last week's film, Nanook of the North, and why it's kind of significant to what we're talking about in this class. So, Nanook is arguably the first feature-length documentary film ever created. Some folks will say that there are other films that are earlier than that, that might be considered a documentary, and I would agree, but this is feature length. So this is about, what is it? I think it's about an hour and 15 minutes. So there's a couple of really important things to understand about this film. This film was a knockout film at the time. People were flocking as soon as it would come into town. People would flock to the theaters and watch it, and it was fascinating because it was one of the first sort of ethnographic films that had been done with another culture. And Robert Flattery, who's the filmmaker and researcher, went to great lengths to try and create this authentic expose of Inuit culture. And for all intents and purposes, I think he did a pretty marvelous job of doing that. But there are some caveats to this, and I think this is really important to where as we as anthropologists and scientists have to step in and say, okay, so what actually happened here, and is it something that we need to be concerned with? So, first of all, I just want to talk a little bit about the film. You've got your main protagonist here. You've got Nanook. He's out there, trying to find food for his family, and all of a sudden, and I don't know if you watched that, the kayak scene where the entire family just comes out of the kayak. I mean, that was wild, right? So you've got this family, they're living in the Arctic. This was all filmed in northern Quebec. So it's in Canada. And it's cold, right? It's really desolate out there. And, we kind of talked a little bit about cultural relativism a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit more of that today. But, what kind of a culture does it take to live in this kind of an environment and to be successful and to survive? Could any one of us do it? Not easily, right? Not easily. We really have to be taught how to live in that environment. If you were to just drop one of us off out there, we would die probably pretty quickly because we don't know how to live there, and that's a part of that culture. So, but I think the really important things to understand about Nanook is that while it does a pretty good job of describing the culture, what it's like to live there, Flattery sort of took some liberties in filming. Come to find out that the whole family was actually sort of cast. So Nanook and his wife and the kids, they're not actually a family. They got him, and they got some other folks to come together and sort of collaborate on this. So they're creating a narrative. So yeah, there's a little bit of fiction in this. There's also a few other things. So, when they're going out hunting seal, one of the things that you don't see is rifles. Well, at this time, the Inuit had rifles, and they used them quite often because compared to a spear. It's a lot easier to shoot something from far away than it is to try and spear something close up. So guns had been incorporated in, but Flattery chose not to use guns. His idea was that he wanted to show sort of the most authentic vision of what he thought the Inuit were. And he mostly did that. He basically sort of glorified this idea of what that culture should look like, and then filmed it, leaving out some of the more modern, or at least modern at that time, items and practices that the Inuit actually had. So while he did a good job of showing what it was like to live there and how to live in that environment, he left a few things out. So I think it's sort of like one of those tales of okay, this seems really authentic. This seems like, a great explanation of how this culture and how this community lives. And at the same time, because of choices from the filmmaker, and at the time he was sort of like an amateur anthropologist, that sometimes things get left out. And so this is why I kind of bring this film up, not only to expose you to this culture and this practice and all this stuff, but also to make you realize that when people are doing this, sometimes they have different ideas about how they want to share this information, right? Sometimes they're going to cherry pick things that they think are important versus, actually telling the complete truth, the whole truth, the holistic aspect. And that's really what we try and focus on as modern day anthropologists, is not to leave out any of the other things, right? If I had gone back and been in Flattery's place, I would have included the fact that they were using rifles at the time, to show that they had been incorporating this technology. So, it's a little bit more about being honest with what's going on. Plus, we never hear their voices, right? This is a silent film. There was no soundtrack that came with this film. Whenever they would show it in a theater, they would either have a recording of some music. So if you were listening to the film, you probably heard that cute 1920s music. Or they would have somebody on a piano playing a musical score to go along with the film. I mean, that's how old this is. These weren't modern day motion pictures. These were silent films. So when they made these, and you see that there's text that pops up every once in a while to kind of set the stage. But filmmaking was done in a different way. They had to sort of explain things differently, while we can give context through language, right? We can talk and tell you what's going on and how it's happening and all that stuff. They didn't have that capability at that time. So that's something else to consider. How are they transmitting that information? So, when it comes down to sort of the viability of the film, I think it's a really great film. I think that it does a really good job of showing what culture was like there, how these folks would live. Do I think that it's perfect? By no means. Do I think it's perfect? Do I think there are problems with it? Absolutely. And I think that we have to recognize those issues as we, grow as a field, to recognize those things, that we can say, okay, yeah, this was a problem. How are we fixing it? How did we fix it? And where are we moving from there? So all good things to consider when you're thinking about the film. Yeah. What did you think? What did you think of the film? Did you enjoy it? I always enjoy it. I think it's fascinating. And I've watched it dozens of times. And it only gets old every 3 or 4 times I watch it, and then it goes back to being really cool. Yeah, okay, I think that's good for the film. Tell me what you all thought. I think it would be fun to discuss. Let's see. This week we're covering culture, and we're going to be talking about how it's all constructed, how we recognize it, how we break things apart, how we as anthropologists understand culture. And there's a lot to cover. We're going to be really diving in. So bear with me. Yeah, we'll get this rocking and rolling here. So go to the next video and we'll start the lecture. Okay, see you then.